So again, thank you for joining us today for the service line replacement requirements. I'm Julie Floyd. I am the Operator Certification and Training Manager for the Office of Drinking Water. And our presenter today will be Daniel Wan with Trupani. Trupani has been working with Waterworks across the state to assist them throughout the process of resolving lead and copper issues. So they are here to help you, and we've been working with them for a while. So Daniel's a great one to give us some information on this. We are offering contact hours for this webinar. Towards the end of the webinar, I'm going to post a link into the chat so that you can fill out a form if you'd like to request contact hours. That's only available for those of you who are here today with us live. We are going to be recording this and posting it to the website. And when it's ready for anybody who registered, I'll be sending out the link to that posting. So with that, I will pass it over to Daniel.
Thank you, Julie. Again, my name is Daniel. I'm with Trupani. We're a contractor with VDH. Our goal here is to help all waterworks across the Commonwealth understand the upcoming lead and copper rule improvements, help you guys prepare, make sure that you're in good shape, and try to get as much done as you can now to help you potentially save some time in the future. Because we are a contractor of the state, everything that we do on your behalf will be free of charge. It's covered entirely by the state. There will be information about how to access our assistance at the end. But before we start this presentation about the service line replacement requirements, I do want to do some quick housekeeping. Julie kind of mentioned this as well. But the first thing is, we do ask that everyone mute their microphone. You can leave your video on if you like, but there's no need to have it on. So by all means, turn it off if you feel more comfortable with that. We will be taking questions. I will be pausing periodically through this presentation to take some questions, but please note that we will not be able to answer all questions during this presentation. However, what we will do is compile the questions, create an FAQ. We will address all those questions in written form, and that will be uploaded along with a recording of this video in a couple of weeks or so to make sure that any questions you do have are addressed. And of course, as I said before, if you have questions or if you have some concerns that are specific to your waterworks, please go ahead and reach out to us and we can provide some assistance to make sure that you guys understand what you need to be doing for the next couple of years. One more reminder as well, Julie mentioned that at the end in the chat, you will see this chat function on, I believe it's on the bottom right of your screen. You can ask your questions there, but also the link to receive contact hours will be posted towards the end of this presentation. It will be up until 5 o'clock. So please try to do it as soon as possible. If you click in at 5:01, there's a good chance that link will not be available and you will not receive contact hours for this. Okay. Yes, there we go. So a quick agenda. We did our introductions already. I am going to do an overview of the lead and copper rule improvements. This is quite an extensive rule. When we've gone through this, it usually takes a couple hours to do, 3 to 4 hours. So I'm just going to give a very high-level overview of it. There's a lot of information on VDH's website to discuss, how to prepare and specific requirements. But today's focus is on the mandatory service line replacement. This is the second presentation we've gone over with the LCR or LCRI or lead and copper rules improvements. The first one was the baseline inventory. That information is available on ODW's website. You can check the video that we presented, see the answers that we gave for the questions that were asked, get some additional material. But here, what we are focused on is one of the more daunting tasks of the lead and copper rule improvements, which is the mandatory service line replacement. We will tell you which service lines need to be replaced. We will talk about this concept of establishing control. We understand that for a lot of you, that you own a portion of the service line, the customer owns a portion of the service line. If the entire service line needs to be replaced, how do you address the portion that is owned by the customer side? This is the concept of control that we'll discuss later on. We'll also talk about the replacement pool and the rate in which you need to be replacing these service lines. This is a requirement to be completed by 2037, so 12 years from now, roughly. It is completely decoupled from your compliance sampling. So even if you do your triennial compliance sampling, your P90 comes back low or even non-detect, if you have a service line that is lead, galvanized requiring replacement, it must be replaced by 2037, given that you have control. And then the final thing we'll discuss is the replacement plan. Anyone who submits an inventory that has an unknown, a lead service line, or a galvanized requiring replacement must develop a replacement plan. We'll talk about why, we'll talk about what's included. It is a form that you can fill out. If you saw the previous replacement plan under the previous lead and copper rule revisions, it is very similar. ODW will be making some changes to it and updating it for LCRI. We'll talk about what those updates are. And then finally, you'll have a link to the technical assistance and resources. The slides I'm presenting today will be available online as well. So take notes as needed. But if what you see in the slides contains everything that you need, please note that this will be available at a later date. Just about us at Trupani, we're an engineering communications firm. We're based in Knoxville, Tennessee, but we do have staff nationwide. For example, my colleague Adam is based in Georgia. I'm based in DC, so not too far from many of y'all. We provided assistance under the old lead and copper rule revision to about 1,500 waterworks across 18 states, including 700 in Virginia. So that included everything from communications materials to do customer notifications, development of initial inventories for very small water systems, advice about how to develop a fully known inventory and eliminate unknowns, and then even training sessions that we held over LCRR back in 2023. So what we're doing here for this specific project is to provide assistance to communities and small water systems and non-transient, non-community water systems that all serve 10,000 individuals or fewer. I will say, if you are a water system that serves more than 10,000 and you have a question, we will be happy to answer it. But our focus here is to really do the brunt of our work on individuals that serve 10,000 or fewer. Assistance is available for all aspects of the lead and copper rule improvements, to give you guys advice about how to proceed and to plan this out for the next couple of years. But our focus really is to try to identify unknowns to help you develop a fully known inventory as soon as possible. Okay, with that said, let's go into the lead and copper rule improvements. Here are some major requirements. The first thing I want to emphasize is that the lead and copper rule improvements starts in November 1st of 2027, so a little over a year and a half from now. There are three major components that are due by November 1st, 2027. The first one is the baseline inventory. You all submitted an initial inventory in October of last year. The baseline inventory is an updated version of that initial inventory you submitted last year. It includes some information about connectors. You need to submit something by November 1st, 2027. Ideally, it'll be fully known, but if you have unknowns, that is okay as well. Just like submitting your initial inventory back in October of last year, having an unknown in your baseline inventory is okay. It does require you to do some additional work. The second thing you need to start compiling is a list of all schools and licensed childcare facilities that you serve. So schools can be elementary schools, private schools, public schools, high schools. All of them need to be compiled together. And when it comes to childcare facilities, they must be licensed childcare facilities. Someone running an unlicensed childcare facility out of their home does not need to be considered. You may also have family who are watching your kids while you're at work. That's not a licensed childcare facility. That does not need to be compiled for the purposes of this submission in 2027. Finally, some of you may be required to submit a service line replacement plan. That service line replacement plan is required for anyone who has an unknown lead or GRR service line. In this baseline inventory they submit on November 1st, 2027, it outlines everything from how are you going to replace the service line, what communications materials are you going to provide your customers, how are you going to identify any remaining unknowns. We'll talk more about it in a second. Second thing I want to mention too is the requirement to validate your non-lead determinations. So in the previous discussion we had about the baseline inventory, we went over two forms of validation. The first one, this validation pool requires any non-lead determination that was made before the lead ban in Virginia or was not identified through a two-point inspection. Any place that's considered non-lead that doesn't meet those two criteria will be validated. A portion of those service lines that are determined non-lead will be validated. So a good example would be if you have a record from, let's say, 1950, and it indicates that the service line material is non-lead, that location will fall into the validation pool. All those locations, you'll take some portion of them to go out and physically inspect them to make sure that what is stated in your record actually matches what's in the ground. Okay, this is an EPA requirement. It must be completed by December 31st of 2034. You will submit the information to the state by January 2025. Okay. Next thing as well is there's the requirement that we're trying to talk about here, which is the removal of all lead and galvanized requiring replacement service lines under the control of the Waterworks by November 1st of 2037, so 12 years from now. Okay, so this is, again, completely decoupled from the P90 or your compliance sampling. You can have really, really good compliance sampling results. But if you have a lead service line in the ground, if you have a galvanized requiring replacement service line, it needs to be removed by November 1st of 2037. Okay. All right. A couple other updates as well. Compliance sampling will change as well. So you built out an inventory. The focus on the inventory this time was trying to determine if you have lead service lines or GRR service lines in the system. If you have lead or if you have GRR, you will return back to standard monitoring in November 2027. For a lot of you, what that means is instead of sampling every 3 years at a reduced number of sites, you will be required to sample every 6 months at a double the number of sites you do right now. So for larger systems, for example, if you're a system that serves 100,000 or more, you're likely on reduced monitoring at a reduced number of sites. That means 50 sites every 3 years. If you have a GRR line, if you have a lead line in your inventory by 2027, November 2027, you will begin standard monitoring, which is 100 sites every 6 months for at least 2 monitoring periods. Okay. Beyond simply increasing the frequency of your sampling, if you have a lead service line, instead of collecting the first liter sample that you're collecting right now, you will have to do sequential sampling to get both the first and fifth liter sample. So that means probably providing your customers with 5 bottles, numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then collecting and analyzing the first and fifth sample for lead. Okay, so want to make sure you're aware of that. It's one of the incentives to A, have a fully developed inventory, but B, if you have the opportunity to remove lead service lines right now before the start of 2027, try to go ahead and do that. Okay, because it does mean sampling requirements will be reduced for you. Sampling is very onerous on customers. It can be very confusing, even if it means collecting a single liter. Imagine a customer trying to collect 5 liters and then sending all that back to you. That can be very confusing as well. And then having to do that every 6 months instead of once every 3 years, that can be very difficult as well. Okay. The next thing I want to let you guys know as well is that the action level, the compliance value from these samples that you collect from customer homes, the classic value we all know is 15 ppb. Once November 1st of 2027 starts, it's going to be reduced to 10 ppb. So what we recommend is look at your sampling results right now. Have you ever come close to 10 ppb previously? You know, if you had 11 ppb in the past, you were okay, but 11 ppb starting November 2027, you'll have an action level exceedance that will require a lot of additional work for you. So, you know, start thinking about potentially, you know, what things can you do to help address that, to help avoid an action level exceedance? Because those who have had an action level exceedance know it's quite a bit of work that you need to do in order to satisfy the requirements of an action level exceedance. Another thing I want to mention as well, and that's currently going on, is that in the event that you have an action level exceedance now, so working under that 15 ppb mark right now until November 2027, if you have an action level exceedance, that requires a tier 1 24-hour notification. So within 24 hours of getting notified that you have an action level exceedance, you need to turn around your communications materials within 24 hours. Okay, I want to let you know that. So everyone here will likely do at least a single round of sampling under the current rule, you know, which we've been doing for the last 30 years. And so just be aware that if you have a 15 ppb mark, then you're going to be in a situation where you have to do a 24-hour tier 1 notice. And then, of course, starting in November 1st of 2027, if you have a action level exceedance of 10 ppb, again, same situation, tier 1 24-hour notification. I'm going to stop here and give people a pause to try to kind of absorb these first set of changes. Do we have any questions, Adam, that we need to address?
Only one question so far. We got asked in the inventory if commercial properties such as restaurants need to be listed.
In the inventory, yes. The inventory does require all service lines, regardless of use, right? So as long as the water line is in the ground, it connects to a building or to an outlet like I don't know, like a drinking faucet or a fountain in the park, you want to make sure to include that. But you don't need a list of, you don't need to compile a list of them the same way you had to compile a list of schools and childcare facilities. Any location, whether commercial or residential, must be included in your inventory if they have the potential to receive water. Okay. All right. Thanks for that. Okay. Going forward, a couple other questions or a couple of things to address. There is additional communications requirements, right? So one of the things is that you will be updating the language in your CCR and in your lead sampling report. They do want to make sure that any sort of health information related to exposure to lead is provided to the customers. And so a lot of the language has been updated. Currently, it's kind of a strange period. We are using the language of LCRR, which will then translate into the language of LCRI starting on November 1st of 2027. So just be aware that over the next few years, the mandatory language that you put in your CCR concerning lead will likely change. Okay. That also includes any sort of material you hand out to your customers as well. In the notification, for example, if there's mandatory language, that may change as well. Another thing I want to mention here, this third bullet point, is the fact that starting in November of 2027, any customer that is served by a lead, GRR, or unknown service line, you must offer them lead sampling. Doesn't mean you have to pay for it, but you do need to offer them lead sampling. So this is an extra incentive, A, to eliminate as many unknowns as you can before November 2027. And then for lead and GRR locations, how many can you get out of the system before then? Our advice generally is to try to identify as many unknowns as possible because this rule does include locations that are served by an unknown service line. I imagine that most of the unknown service lines that you have in your system will be determined as non-lead, but determining them as non-lead will allow you to kind of avoid this particular requirement for that particular customer. Okay. And then finally, there is a lot of public education requirements for the school and childcare facilities. The reason why you're having to compile a list of school and childcare facilities is starting in November 2027, you will be required to sample from schools and childcare facilities served by that you serve. You need to do 20% of them every single year for the first 5 years until essentially all 100% of the primary schools and licensed childcare facilities are sampled by 2032. Okay. Next question, next section. As a reminder, I think all of you remember having to send out customer notifications to customers served by lead, GRR, or unknown service lines. This has to happen again this year. You can use the exact same form that was provided by VDH. It's on their website. If you don't have a copy of it, reach out to us. We can provide that for you as well. It needs to be sent out by the end of this year. Okay, so just make sure it's in the mail by December 31st, and you should be fine. Doesn't have to be certified mail. As long as it's in the mail, make a good faith effort. You should be in good shape there. Then, just please note, yes, by the end of 2025, this is an annual requirement. So you'll be doing this December 31st, 2025. You'll be doing this December 31st, 2026 as well, okay? Once LCRI starts, that timeline will change a little bit. So just be aware of that, but just know right now you're doing at least 2 more rounds of customer notifications at the end of every calendar year, okay? Another thing that is changing under LCRI starting in November 1st of 2027 is notification to the customer and those who are served, okay? And so that may sound strange to you, but what that means is that you may have renters. You may have renters and the homeowner actually lives in a completely different state, maybe a completely different system served by a completely different water system. Notifying the customer / owner doesn't necessarily notify those who are consuming water at that property. So you need to make sure that you notify both. The vast majority of the customer notifications will just go to one person because the person who owns the location is also the person who lives there, but you need to make sure that those consuming the water are also receive a notification. So, compare your billing address versus the service address. If those are different, you know that for that particular location, 2 notifications need to go out. One to the billing address, one to the service address. Okay. In addition to these notifications that need to be sent out by the end of this year, don't forget that you need to certify that you actually did this. Okay, that you sent out the letters appropriately, that they went to, you sent out the right letters. So you need to provide them a copy of what you sent to each of the customers, or to the customers served by GRR, lead, or unknowns. Just provide a single example of that letter that you sent to those classes of customers. Certify that by July 1st of next year. So the timeline works. Send out your notifications by the end of this year, December 31st. And then by July 1st of this year, July 1st of next year, July 1st, 2026, you will certify that you completed your customer notification requirements for 2025. Okay. You can certify it a couple of different ways. You can upload the certification form and the examples of the letters to the Swift portal, the same portal you use to submit your inventory, or you can email a copy to the field office, and we can provide you the best point of contact for that field office. They do have inboxes which they're using to try to intake these forms. And as a reminder again, notifications only need to go to customers that are served by lead, GRR, or unknown. So if your inventory is fully known and fully non-lead, you do not need to send out customer notifications. Okay. Finally, you will have turnover of customers. Someone moves out, someone moves in. You need to notify residents upon a new service initiation at the address that is served by lead, GRR, or unknown within 1 business day. So when we say 1 business day, what we mean is just make sure within 1 business day, a letter is prepared and in the mail for that particular customer. So let's say a customer applies for a new service on Saturday. You guys aren't open on Saturday. That coming Monday, make sure to have a letter letting them know if they're served by lead, GRR, or unknown. Same thing with your annual notifications. If that customer is served by a non-lead service line, you don't have to send them this notification. And the requirement for this rule is they want to make sure that people, especially if they're served by lead or GRR, know as soon as possible that their service line is made of this material. You do not want to wait to your annual notification to let some customer know about this, because that could potentially be 364 days that they're drinking leaded water, when in reality they could have taken some simple steps like buying a water pitcher filter to help reduce their exposure to lead. Okay. All right. Oops, sorry. I'm going to take a quick pause here about communications. I did see some questions. Adam, do you mind letting me know with what's of greatest concern?
Not at all. So one question we had is, do Waterworks that have unknown service lines but don't have any confirmed lead or GRR also return to the 6-month monitoring in January 28?
Thank you very much, Steve, for asking that. I see your question now. No. So if your inventory only contains non-lead or unknown service lines, you will not be returning back to standard monitoring. Okay. You will retain your current monitoring frequency, but once you find a GRR line or once you find a lead service line, you will be kicked back into standard monitoring every 6 months at probably a double number of sites that you have. Okay. All right. Yep.
Another question we had was, for the 1st and 5th liter sampling, is that for only locations that are served by lead lines or also ones that are served by GRR lines?
Yeah. So that's a good question as well. It will be only locations that are served by lead service lines. So lead service lines, so whether that's a single family home or a multifamily residence, if it's made of lead, 1st and 5th liter sampling from that location. GRR, having GRR in your inventory only kicks you back to standard monitoring, but you can do your normal 1st liter sampling from there, not 1st and 5th. Okay. Okay. Any more questions? Please have them come. Like I said, if we don't answer them right now, we will get to them in our follow-up FAQ and make sure you guys have all your questions addressed. All right, continuing on. A couple of things we want to do. some recommendations before November 1st, 2027. I've gone over a lot of the requirements for LCRI, but the ones we feel and a lot of water systems are adopting or waterworks are adopting is first, identify as many unknown service lines as you can. There are strategies to help streamline this, but do this as quickly as possible is the best recommendation. It means fewer notifications. It means fewer offerings of lead sampling at these locations. It means, it just helps you tremendously. If you're able to build a fully known, fully non-lead inventory, that also means this presentation about mandatory replacements does not apply to you because there's no requirement to replace a non-lead service line. It also means your compliance is a lot simpler. If you get a fully known inventory by November 1st, 2027, not only do you avoid that 1st and 5th liter sampling, you may be able to, you should stay on standard monitoring. I mean, so you're reduced monitoring. So once every 3 years at a reduced number of sites for the vast majority of y'all, okay? A couple of things as well. If you do have known lead service lines, it's confirmed to be confirmed to be lead service lines, you can potentially collect special non-compliance 1st and 5th liter samples. We highly recommend this because it allows you to test how good your communications material is. Sampling 1st and 5th liter is far more complicated, and we already know that customers, the instructions for sampling just a single liter can be difficult. So it gives you an opportunity to see how clear your instructions are. It gives you an opportunity to see how, get customer feedback about it. But more importantly, it gives you an idea about where your compliance may potentially be starting November 1st of 2027. If you have lead lines and those values come back really low, you may be, that's good news for you. But if those values come back around 10 ppb, then that means you need to start making preparations in the event that you may have an action level exceedance, right? So if you can do this, it really will help you in the future to try to potentially better prepare for any new compliance requirements that start November 1st of 2027. Another thing we recommend as well, for those who do have corrosion control treatment, make sure to confirm that your corrosion control treatment is working within your operational parameters. Maybe, again, take some additional water quality parameter samples in your distribution system at maybe locations you haven't sampled in the past. Make sure your orthophosphate is at the right level in the distribution system. Make sure your pH and your alkalinity is correct as well. Check your machinery as well. Make sure that your pumps are working fine. Make sure, like I said, optimal corrosion control treatment is still working just fine for you all. And then finally, this is the most difficult one to do, but it is highly recommended. If you can, proactively complete full lead service line replacements or GRR service line replacements if you have the money and the time and the ability to do this. If, for example, you're a water system with 5 or 6 lead service lines, if you're able to replace that in the next couple of years, that means while also developing a fully known inventory, again, that means you don't have to do as much communication materials. You're not under the requirement to replace all service line within 10 years. Your compliance sampling will be a lot simpler. Your notification requirements will be a lot simpler as well. Okay. As I mentioned before, you have to compile a list of all of the schools and childcare facilities to prepare for school and childcare facility sampling starting in November 1st of 2027. One thing that may help you out is to encourage encourage schools and childcare facilities to participate in this voluntary wind sampling. So any school that participates in wind sampling and gets their sampling completed will be removed from your list of locations that you have to sample starting 2027. It is far more comprehensive sampling. For the LCRI, you only need to collect 5 samples from schools and 2 samples from childcare facilities. But under the wind sampling, which again is purely voluntary, all outlets will be sampled. This is run by the state. It is free for y'all. It's free for them actually, and it really does reduce a lot of the sampling burden on the water system when it comes to childcare facility and school sampling. And it also, like I said, it's free. So this link is included in the presentation. You guys can reference this in the future and provide that to your childcare facilities and schools. Right now, I believe enrollment is closed, but it should be opening sometime soon. And so those who do want to join in and do want to do this can enroll and get some free lead sampling. And for the schools, it's quite a good bit of good public relations. They can demonstrate to the parents that, hey, we did lead sampling in 2025 or 2026. All our values came back really, really low. Okay. This is a quick summary of what needs to be done. So again, 2025, make sure to update your CCR, especially for next year as well. Go ahead and make sure to be aware of any sort of 24-hour Tier 1 notification in the event that you exceed the current lead action level of 15 ppb. Again, 10 ppb starting in 2027. And then don't forget to do your annual notification. Once you finish your annual notification, just a reminder, you need to certify that it was completed by July 1st of 2026, and then you're going to do another round of annual notification at the end of December 31st, 2026, then of course recertify in July 1st of 2027. November 1st, 2027, that's the big one, right? Baseline inventory, which now includes connector information, replacement plan if you have unknown lead or GR lines, list of school and child care facilities, action levels dropping by 50% down to 10 ppb from the current 15 ppb, and then standard tap monitoring begins for any system that has GRR or lead service lines. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead all the way down to November 1st, 2037. This is when you need to develop a fully known inventory. This is also when the requirement to remove all lead and galvanized requiring replacement service lines, it needs to be completed by November 2037. Okay, I'm going to take a quick pause for some questions. Adam, what do you have for me?
Okay, so another question that we have is if a system has the same number or more GRR service lines than the number of samples that they're required to take, should they then sample at all the GRR connections and just ignore the type and age of plumbing in the home?
Right, that's a good question. GRR is a higher priority. We have tiers. Right now there's 3 tiers, I believe. Going in the future, there are 5 tiers. The GR locations are a higher tier than locations that have copper lines and lead solder. So yes, you will be collecting your samples first from those GRR locations. And in the event that you can't meet the minimum number requirement, then you move down to the next tier. One thing I will say is that what the new rule will take your highest values to meet the minimum number of requirements. So what that means is, let's say you're required to collect 50 samples. If you are fortunate and collect 55 samples, the lowest 5 samples will be basically tossed out, and it'll take the highest 50 samples from the highest tiers. So oversampling does not benefit you. They really want to make sure that they represent the system's lead risk the best possible. So don't plan on collecting extra samples. Once you hit the minimum requirement, whether that's 50, 100, 20, whatever the case, once those results in, you're good to go. Okay. Other questions?
Another one we have is if you're a lead-free system with some galvanized service lines, is it worthwhile to track service line materials when encountered during normal operations if you'd still be required to return to that property to do a 2-point inspection for the future inventory requirements?
Yes, we always recommend going ahead and identifying materials during normal operations. I assume when you say that you have galvanized in the system, you've been able to demonstrate that it is not GRR, or potentially the galvanized is only on the system side and not on the customer side, so that downstream configuration doesn't exist. But yes, always document materials when you have an opportunity to view them during normal operations. This will reduce your validation pool and make your life a little bit easier. So yeah, I highly recommend that. And I'll take one more question.
One more question we had is if a childcare facility has already tested all their faucets, can those results be sent in to comply with the WIN?
Correct. Yes, that will. It really depends on when those were collected. I cannot remember exactly the cutoff date. I want to say 2021. So if it was collected within the last 4 years, those results are valid. That location will not be required to be sampled. But what I'll do is I will find the exact cutoff date, and when we respond in the future, we'll make sure to have that information available to you, so you know that whether or not you need to resample this particular location. Okay. And here's another thing as well. You may have licensed childcare facilities that have independently decided to go and get their their faucets tested. If those are tested using a method that is compliant with the EPA rule and within the correct time period, that will work. right? We don't want them going around using kits they got from Home Depot and testing it that way. If they're using the 200.8 done by a certified lab within the correct time period, that should be fine. If they can provide you those results and it, again, is within the correct time period and using the correct method, you should be okay there, okay? All right, I'm going to continue on because we want to get into the meaty part of this, which is the mandatory service line replacements, okay? So, we want to talk about these service line replacements. I've mentioned before, it's going to be lead and GR lines that are being required to replace. The rule states that you need to replace the entire service line. So that's both the public and private portion, if that exists, such that no portion of lead or galvanized requiring replacement remains, okay? The big key here is the concept of control, that service lines under the control must be replaced regardless of ownership. Ownership and control are not the same thing. You as water systems can exercise a level of control on that private side service line that is completely independent of the fact that the customer owns that particular part of the service line, okay? One thing I do want to emphasize as well is that LCRI does not define who must pay for the full service line replacement. Now that may seem daunting, but what that really means is actually a bit of good news for y'all is that any strategy that you can come up with is valid. I can give examples later, but the one that comes to mind is that there are places who have applied for grants to replace their lead service lines, and as such are able to replace the lead service line on the customer side at no cost to the customer. There are other places that have decided we cannot, we just don't have the grant money. We cannot afford to pay out of pocket. So what we're going to do is offer low interest loans to our customers, right? I'll talk a little more about some of the various financing options that are available to you, but just know LCRI does not define who must pay for the full service line, okay? Full service line replacement. Another thing I want to mention as well is if the ownership of that particular home is changes, you need to offer to replace their service line within 6 months of the change of ownership, right? So not only do you need, once that ownership changes and they start a new service, you need to notify them that they have a lead or a GRR line within 1 business day, and then you need to offer them within 6 months to, to replace that portion of their service line. Tell them how they could potentially do this, whether it's something that you can do through funding that you've made available to your customers, or take you guys up on a low interest loan or something along those lines, okay? The LCRI requires the replacement of all lead and GRR service lines within 10 years, so that's 2037. The state can require you to replace it a little bit faster than 2037. So if you only have a single, 1 or 2 lead service lines, I wouldn't, rely on the fact that you may have until 2037 to get this done. If the state determines, potentially determines that you could get this done a little quicker, they may shorten that timeline for you. However, there is the option for a deferred deadline for systems. So this is an instance in which you have a lot of lead and GR service lines at a level that exceeds 39 per 1,000 connections. So if that happens to be you, then please note that you don't necessarily have to meet this 2037 deadline. But as far as I know, there are no places in Virginia and the Commonwealth that actually have this issue. The classic example I can think of is Chicago. They have a significant number of lead service lines. And so in their case, they are replacing it as quickly as possible, but they will likely be on a deferred deadline because they just have so many service lines to replace. Okay. So I want to make really, really clear about what is a galvanized requiring replacement. Okay. So a galvanized line is considered GRR or galvanized requiring replacement if it is currently downstream of a lead service line or if it's currently downstream of an unknown service line, okay? The second condition in which it's considered GRR is if you know it was previously downstream of a lead service line. So let's say you went in, you replaced all your lead service lines with copper, but there is a galvanized line on the customer side. That galvanized line on the customer side was previously downstream of your lead service line. Therefore, it will be considered GRR, okay? Finally, as I mentioned before, you may know what the 2 materials are. You may know that it is copper on your side. You may know it's galvanized on the customer side. However, you don't have evidence to demonstrate that it was never lead on your side. So if that evidence does not exist, then galvanized on the customer side is going to be considered GRR, Okay, if you remember your inventory that you submitted last year, there was a column that's asked whether or not you knew that the public side was ever lead. I think the options were yes, no, or unknown. If it's unknown or yes, it is going to be considered a GRR service line because again, you cannot demonstrate that the galvanized side on the customer side was never downstream of a lead service line on the system side. Okay. So when it comes to GRR, this configuration only concerns service lines. So there are a couple conditions in which a galvanized line on the customer side is not going to be considered GRR. First one is if you're able to demonstrate that it's never been led downstream of a lead service line. So what we see a lot is that if there's galvanized on the customer side and it's, let's say, plastic on the system side, the system may have documentation demonstrating what the original material was when they replaced that line with plastic. Okay, so if you have that, you can demonstrate that, oh yeah, in this particular situation for this particular address, the galvanized line on the customer side was never downstream of a lead service line, therefore it's just going to be a non-lead service line. The second configuration that I want to mention as well is that if you have a lead connector. A lead connector is not a service line, right? And I'll define connector in a second just so we're really clear. But just because you have a lead service line, a lead connector will not make a galvanized line galvanized requiring replacement. Okay, so the only component that you have is a lead connector, and then you have galvanized lines that are on the system side or on the customer side that was never downstream of a lead service line. Then it's going to be considered a non-lead galvanized line, just a normal non-lead line. Okay. So again, connector, gooseneck, pigtail, that will not create a GR situation for your service line. They're two different materials. They're independent of each other. Okay. All right. So when it comes to connectors, again, I want to be really, really clear about this. The way the rule defines a connector is it is a short segment of piping not exceeding 3 feet that can be bent to connect piping. I think most people know them as goosenecks or pigtails, but what they are not are fittings, joints, couplings, solder, any of that. Okay, we're talking specifically about a piece of piping that's 3 feet or less that can be bent. Most often what you'll see is you'll have a water main with a lead gooseneck connecting to a galvanized line. That's what you kind of see the most often, right? So we're not talking about lead solder inside a copper line. We're not talking about a brass component that may have some portion of lead mixed into the brass. That is not considered a connector, okay? Another thing about connectors I want to mention as well is if you have the opportunity to encounter these connectors during your normal operations and it happens to be made of lead, make sure you replace it. So let's say you're doing a water main replacement or a water main repair. You need to hook those customers back up to your main. You find that some of these connectors are made of lead. Make sure you have enough copper piping to swap out that lead with copper. Okay, this is a requirement. The connector information must be included in the baseline inventory. If you want to go back to our baseline inventory presentation, you can hear a little more about this. But one thing I want to emphasize as well is unlike the service line, there is not a requirement for you to identify every single connector that you have by 2037. Okay, connectors, given the length of them, oftentimes are very difficult to identify unless you tear up the concrete, right? It's going to be closer to the main. Most of it's going to be buried under asphalt or concrete for a lot of water systems or under the road. And so there is not a requirement that you go and dig up every single or tear through all the concrete in order to find the connector information. More importantly, is not every service line has a connector, right? A lot of y'all are probably just using straight poly or PVC from the water main to the meter. Other places are using copper. Every connection has, every customer has a service line. Not every connection, not every service line uses a connector. So you may have 123 Main Street that has a copper connector connected to it, but its neighbors is just straight PVC and straight copper all the way to the meter. So just be aware of that. When it comes to recording your connector information, just record what you know through records and record what you know through normal operations and encounters. Okay. All right. With that said, I've talked about this a little bit earlier, but what is under control for the purposes of your service line replacements? Control is not ownership. Control is established when you guys have access. And that could be physical access, that could be legal access to conduct a full service line replacement. Okay. And so the way the EPA has interpreted this concept of control is when the water system has the authority to manage or exercise a restraining or controlling influence on that particular water line, in this case, the private side service line. Great example. You guys have the ability to go up to the meter, shut off the water to a particular home if they're not paying, right? If they're truant on their payments, or if the home is abandoned and you want to make sure that the water is shut off so it doesn't flood that home or flood that location. You're exercising a level of control even though you don't own anything past the meter. Okay. And so control, by the way the EPA defines it, is really dependent on the relevant laws and the physical access that you guys have for this particular location. So I'll go into some laws in a little bit, but like a good example will be physical access. There are provisions in this rule that say if a customer refuses to allow you onto their property, you do not have control. And if you do not have control, then you do not have to replace that particular service line. There are plenty of reasons why an individual may not want you on their property. They may have a prized rose bed that runs right underneath, right above the service line. They don't want you to tear that up, and so they know the risks associated with GRR or lead, and they say no, I refuse to allow you on my property. If they do refuse, you don't have to worry about it. That doesn't count towards the service line you need to replace. Okay. So one thing you need to do is establish what level of control that you have, right? So you need to identify what kind of laws, regulations, even water tariff agreements or plumbing codes that you may have that may restrict or condition your access to getting a full service line replacement. Okay, this is going to be documented in the replacement plan, but one thing I want you guys to really know is that if you believe you do not have access to a location, you need to document and prove why you don't have full control to do a service line replacement. You can't just say, I can't do this, right? You must demonstrate why, all right? And so in the event that there are specific laws or regulations or something in your plumbing code that restricts or conditions your access to the private side service line or limits your ability to do a full service line replacement, it must be documented in the replacement plan, and that needs to be submitted to the state. Okay. So there are instances in which there is a very clear and well-defined, legally defined delineation of property, and the rule or the laws that you guys have basically say that you can't go past a property without customer permission. If you need permission in order to get control over the private side service line, you need to make at least 4 attempts to obtain property access through 2 different methods, right? So that could be letters and door hangers. That's 2 different methods. It could be phone calls. You need to make 4 attempts to try to maintain, to try to get access to that property. If they refuse, then you're good to go, right? If they don't respond and you made 4 attempts, you're good to go that location. You don't have to replace that service line, okay? But one thing you need to do is if they refuse, you do need to document that, okay? You need to document why you don't have access, and in this case, it's because the customer refused to allow you onto their property. As I mentioned before, anytime you have a change in property ownership, you do have to begin this process all over again. And so if the property changes again, then you do have 1 year to kind of make a reasonable effort. And a reasonable effort is defined again, 4 attempts over 2 methods to try to get their consent to replace that service line. Okay. All right. A couple of examples of control that were developed through legislation. Okay, so these are pretty interesting ones. So the first one's Madison, Wisconsin. And so what they did is they mandated that the homeowners replace their portion of their service line. And if the homeowner did not replace their portion of the service line, they were referred to the city attorney. So in this case, again, it's not the system's responsibility. The system is not paying for it, but the system is using their control and the legal avenues to try to force customers and to make sure that customers replace their portion of the service line. Because again, if a customer has a lead service line, that affects your compliance, right? So if you're forced to, you're going to be sampling from these locations that have lead service lines. If you have an action level exceedance, that has a whole set of cascading requirements for you. So it does make sense that that rules are established because you are contingent on your compliance is contingent on the private ownership of the service line that happens to be made of lead. Okay. Another more extreme version of this was Edgerton, Wisconsin. They actually threatened to shut off water if customers refused access to their to the private portion of the service line. They basically said the same things like we are beholden to you in terms of our compliance requirements, and we do not want to be beholden to you. So if you do not if you do not allow us to replace your service line, we're going to shut off water to you. And you won't have access. And we don't want to put our compliance at risk because you don't want to participate in this program. Another one is Indiana. So the entire state of Indiana, they established rules and criteria to allow utilities to understand when they can actually replace a customer portion of the service line without owner consent, or taking even more extreme example and disconnect the service line from the system as a whole. So they established a bunch of rules that water systems need to follow in order to remove service lines when possible, or even disconnect a customer to reduce their risk of an action level exceedance. And then finally, one of the more famous versions is New Jersey. They granted water systems legal access to the private property to replace the private side of the service line without even having to consult with the owner. Okay, so what they were facing was you had properties where it was renters that lived there, and the owner was just really never making themselves available to this. And so they said, for the sake of the renters who are actually the ones consuming the water, we're going to pass this law, allow water systems to go onto private property and replace those service lines. And so, the exact rule was public water systems are obligated or be obligated to replace lead service lines, including those that exist on private property, and then authorized to recoup the cost of lead service line replacements from all subscribers of the public water systems. So not only did they give them access to the private side of the service line to do the full replacement, it also said, hey, you guys are allowed to raise rates to recoup the cost of getting this done. Okay, I'm going to pause for questions if we have any.
We haven't had any questions since the last round.
Okay, all right, we'll continue on. So you may be thinking to yourself, well, we're talking about full service line replacements. There are going to be conditions in which you cannot do a full service line replacement. And so for the most part, partial replacements. So partial replacement is defined as when a portion of the lead or GR service line is left upon the completion of the work. That's a partial replacement. So a classic example is replacing a lead service line on the system side and leaving the galvanized line on the customer side. These are largely prohibited, but there are two major exceptions. The first one is emergency repair, right? You can't, you guys can't prepare for all this. It's an emergency. A service line breaks in your side of the property. It's your service line. You go do an emergency replacement, take care of that service line. You leave what's on the customer side. That's perfectly fine if it's an emergency replacement, but you do need to offer to replace the private portion of the line within 45 days. Okay, the key word is offer here. You don't have to do it, but you do need to offer it. The second one, planned infrastructure work. So let's say you're doing a system upgrade. You're replacing the main in the street. You're adding new service lines in addition to a new water main. That is permitted, so long as the planned infrastructure work is not solely for the purpose of service line replacements, right? So, for example, if you're I don't know, like, yeah, let's say you have a CIP in place that you're going to do, and it only addresses service lines. This would not fall into this exception. It really concerns stuff like water meter repairs, main replacements. Those are tangentially related to the service line. So you're allowed in this case to go ahead and replace the partial portion of the service line, your part of the service line. Yeah, you're allowed to do that. However, there are situations in which you can couple these at the same time, right? You can actually replace the customer side of the service line at the same time. If you need consent, make sure that you receive consent to replace the customer's portion of the service line when you're doing your planned infrastructure work. So your outreach for that needs to begin before you actually start your planned work. Okay. All right. A couple things as well. When you're doing your partial replacement, if you happen to do that, make sure to use dielectric coupling, right? You want to make sure you separate the replaced service line from any sort of remaining GRR or lead service line. Last thing you want is galvanic corrosion. You get in a situation in which you replace the service line and it actually causes more leaching of lead into the water. Like, you don't want to do that. You do want to make sure to give for any sort of planned infrastructure work to give the customers and non-owners, occupants, so a renter, a 45-day notice before you begin this project. And then when you return the line into service for a partial replacement, make sure you provide them information explaining the temporary increase of lead, right? Because that physical disruption will likely dislodge some lead if it's a lead service line or a GRR service line. Make sure you provide them premise plumbing flushing instructions. And then in this case, you will be providing them an ANSI certified pitcher and 6 months of replacement cartridges. So what we tell people to do is just make some kits, right? You go ahead, go to your big box store, buy the number of pitchers and cartridges that you need, create the material, the notice explain the temporary risk, instructions about how to flush your service line, slap that on the box, put it on the front porch. When you're done with the work, give them a knock. They have that. You do not need to certify that they use it. You just need to provide them with the equipment to reduce any sort of lead exposure due to the work that you just completed. And then finally, 3 to 6 months after the work is complete, do offer to do some follow-up sampling. Do not sample for 3 or 6 months. There's just not enough time for the pipes to be conditioned. So offer 3 to 6 months afterwards. They'll kind of give the customer an idea about their current lead exposure after the work was complete. Okay. So we've talked about kind of what's included. We talked about control. We want to talk about here about the rate and the pool of service lines that need to be replaced. So I'm going to go through this a little bit quickly because I think we're running a little short on time. But the replacement pool consists of all lead, GRR, and unknown service lines. So that means on average, you need to replace 10% of all these lead and GRR service lines each year. Okay. And so the real reason why I highlighted unknowns is because I really want you guys to reduce the total number of unknowns you have because your overall pool will be smaller. Okay. One thing that I also want to mention is that only full service line replacements of lead and GRR service lines count towards the replacement rate. So identifying an unknown service line as non-lead does not count to your replacement rate. What you do not want to do is be in a situation in which you have a very large pool requiring a very large number of replacements, and you simply do not have enough lead or GRR service lines to meet that rate. And so, and we'll skip over this as well. This is what I want to illustrate it. We have 2 water systems. Both have 1,000 service lines. Both have 50 lead service lines each. But the big difference between system 1 and system 2 is the fact that system 1 has very few unknowns, only 150, while system 2 has 800 unknowns. Your overall replacement pool will include lead and unknowns plus GRR, no GRRs in this case. And so in the case of system 1, that's 200 service lines. 200 service lines at 10% a year is 20 lines per year. They can meet the first couple of years, no problem. Okay. The problem for system number 2, 50 lines plus 800 unknowns, 850 service lines. That means 85 lines per year based off this 10% replacement rate. There is no way for them to reach this 85 lines replaced per year because they only have 50 lead service lines. The chances of them finding 35 additional service lines in their unknown pool may be unlikely, but what you're ending up doing is having to identify unknowns, hoping you find lead while also replacing lead service lines at the same time. You're trying to attack 2 things at once. That's going to be extremely difficult for any system. Okay. So again, 85 replacements per year is really not going to be feasible for a system with only 50 lead service lines. Okay. So what that means is you really need to focus on identifying unknowns as best as possible. There are pre-approved methods. So, excavation, visual inspection, customer surveys, you can start doing those now. 2-point inspection, highly, highly recommend. If you haven't utilized date of construction, go ahead and review this. There are 2 dates to keep in mind, 1978, 1988. You may be able to identify a service line as non-lead through just the build year itself or the installation of the service line. The next thing I want to mention too is statistical methodology. The idea here is you're going to randomly inspect a subset of your remaining unknowns. If those happen to come back non-lead, then you can make a determination about all of the remaining unknowns. These methodologies require your field office to approve them ahead of time. They want to make sure that you are correctly randomizing this. There's also an opportunity to go over the plan itself to make sure that you're doing things correctly, right? They want to make sure it's doing it right. They don't want you to accidentally select locations that just happen to be in the newest part of your system. That will not be an accurate reflection of the system conditions and the remaining unknowns. It really has to be random. There are guidance documents. There's materials that you need to submit to the state. If you need help on that, please talk to us. We've done it for systems in the past. We can help you kind of navigate the process. Okay. So quick overview of what needs to be done. Apologies, I wish I had more time. I will stay on later for questions, but comprehensive and detailed plan for the service line replacement plan. It includes everything from how you're going to replace the service lines to how you're going to identify unknowns to materials about how you're going to communicate to your customers. It is required for any system with one lead line, one GRR line, or one unknown service line, and it must be made publicly available online for systems serving 50,000 or more. Okay. These plans are certified and submitted to the state annually. Submitted to the state annually, and then if the system doesn't make any changes to it, they can just certify that this hasn't been updated. It's the same thing as the previous year. Okay. Major components. We'll go over this quickly. As I discussed previously, strategies to identify how you're going to identify your remaining unknowns. More importantly, how are you going to conduct a full service line replacement? The last thing the system needs or the state wants is that is for you to be in a situation in which you have lead service lines that you need to replace, but you don't know how to do it. So you need to sort of navigate and plan that now so that when 2027 rolls around, you can hit the ground running, start replacing those service lines immediately. Okay. Let's see. There are some funding strategies that we want to discuss as well. As I said before, the rule doesn't require the system or has no information explaining how one will pay for the replacement of customer side service lines. So funding strategies need to be discussed here. Like I said before, if you are able to raise rates and use that to cover the replacement of service lines, that's great. If you can offer low interest loans to your customers, that's great as well. No interest loans, even better. If you get grant money through SRF or through some other strategies, that's an option as well. Or some places have said what we'll do is we'll help negotiate lower fees with licensed plumbers, and so that if a customer wants to get their service line replaced, they can save a bit of money if they contact these individuals. We all know that replacing a service line proactively is going to be a lot cheaper than replacing a service line through an emergency, right? Especially these galvanized requiring replacements. Galvanized not a great material, tends to break fairly easily, and so if it breaks, and someone needs to come out there for an emergency repair, that's going to be far more expensive. Okay. Some communications requirements as well, about how you're going to make your replacement plan available and the program that's available. And then finally, as I mentioned before, you really need to identify any laws, regulations, water tariffs, plumbing codes that affect your ability to gain access to conduct a full replacement. Okay. This is just kind of a quick highlight. You can click this afterwards, but there are multiple forms of funding through FCAP, SRF funding, LEAP funding. The key thing I want to mention here is that funding applications for 2024 that were sent to fiscal year 2024 are still being currently reviewed. Fiscal year 25 and 26 are being revised based off the lead service line data. So everyone submitted an inventory, the EPA got that, and so they're redistributing some of the money based off who needs it more. Now that I have some hard data about where lead service lines will be. And then applications for funding is still being offered and accepted. Those who have lead service lines, we highly, highly recommend that you guys go ahead and start applying now. The funding may be limited and it's really focused on removing lead service lines. So start trying to do that as soon as possible. You may be able to get some free money to get this out of your system and help you with your compliance. Okay, I've talked a lot about this previously about really the best incentive to reduce your lead and GR service lines. The biggest thing is going to help your compliance out. The chances of hitting an actionable exceedance are going to be far lower if you don't have any lead or GR in your system. Okay. So last thing, just a quick summary about what we're trying to do. All lead and GR service lines under your control must be replaced by 2037, so within 10 years. Ownership is not part of the consideration here. It's really about control, and control is legal or physical access. And just as a reminder, if you have a lead, GRR, or unknown service line in in your inventory, you need to submit a replacement plan by November 1st of 2027. Okay. Some extra guidance documents. Our technical assistance is available. This will be available on the slides. You can find this on the VDH's website. But what we'll do is I will take anyone who still remains. Apologies for letting this go long. I didn't keep track of time. I will take any kind of questions that may remain. Yeah. Any questions, Adam?
No questions about the material in the chat.
Okay. With that said, we will be providing these slides on the website, available for everyone to view. Do not forget to go ahead and click that link to get your contact hours. If you want to scan a QR code or scan this link, please do. Reach out to us. Our services are free. We can go into greater detail about what you guys need to do for a mandatory replacement, or more importantly, we can help you guys get fully known inventories, and so this will be completely off the table. Okay. I appreciate you all sticking by for the next extra 5 minutes. Please, by all means, please reach out to us and let us know how we can help you out. It's a free service. We want to make sure you're best prepared for November 2027. Okay.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Take care now.